Hello, and thank you for joining part 2 of our webinar series, Abdominal Pain, Anxiety, and How to Help Your Teen During COVID-19. I'm Georgia Weston. I'm the Executive Director of CHYP, Creative Healing for Youth in Pain. We are a nonprofit providing educational resources, exposure to creative healing experiences, and social support online. And CHYP was online long before COVID-19 because we wanted to reach as many teens and families as possible. Not everyone has access to equal health care due to geography, socioeconomic status, health insurance, clinic wait lists. There are just so many different barriers to care. And that's why Dr. Lonnie Zeltzer founded CHYP. So we can offer services like this webinar series virtually. But what's more is we can connect people who wouldn't otherwise have met. So many of our teens and parents come to CHYP after long journeys of searching for answers and feelings of isolation and anger, fear, sadness. All of those can add up. So we're hoping this webinar series can offer interesting perspectives and new ways of interacting with your teens. And thank you again for joining us today, and we have a great discussion lined up with your live Q&A questions with Dr. Levy. We would like to ask that everyone please keep yourselves muted and your cameras off so we can enjoy without distractions, and you will be able to ask your questions in the Zoom chat that you can find at the bottom of your screen, so you can ask those questions throughout our speakers to address. And now I am pleased to introduce CHYP's board member, Dana Pacholsky, who will be moderating our conversation with our guest today, Dr. Samantha Levy. And Dana also serves on the board of the UCLA Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital. She's the co-chair of the Regenerative Medicine Institute campaign for Cedars-Sinai, the vice chair of Cedars-Sinai's Innovation Center project for the Board of Governors, and is a board member for the Caton Children's Museum. Now I will hand it over to Dana to introduce Dr. Levy and lead our discussion. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Georgia, and welcome everybody. Thank you for those of you who are joining us the second time this week, and for all of you that are joining us for the first time this week, we welcome you. I have the pleasure of having an hour discussion, live Q&A with Dr. Samantha Levy, who's a clinical psychologist working with children, teens, parents, and whole families experiencing chronic pain. She's an integrative team member of the Whole Child LA Pain Clinic and a clinical advisory board member of CHYP. We were fortunate enough to hear from Dr. David Ziering the gastrointestinal approach to the mind-gut relationship and food. And today I'm really excited to be able to speak with Dr. Levy from the psychological side of that and other implications and how we as parents can have a more positive impact and maybe get out of the way a little bit or add some new things in to help our children. So welcome, Dr. Levy. Good morning.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Georgia and Lonnie, for creating CHYP in the first place. And I'm so happy to be part of CHYP programming. So we heard a little bit from Dr. Ziering about the gut and how it's affected by anxiety the other day. And I just wanted to start out by saying that what I hear all the time from clients is, I'm not anxious, I just have a stomach ache. So that's kind of the opening thing that we often start with, because a lot of time people don't feel their anxiety in their brain or in their thoughts. They start to experience it in their body and don't realize that that is really the anxiety communicating somatically. I think we can all understand that by thinking about times when, everybody's had the situation where maybe you're going to give a presentation, you have butterflies in your stomach, or if we're going to talk really candidly, how many people have had to poop when they're nervous? Or think about all those commercials where someone's really stressed out because they have a meeting and they're chugging the Mylanta. So it's part of our culture to know that we have GI symptoms when we're anxious, but somehow we forget about that sometimes. The truth is that we actually create 95% of our serotonin in our gut, not in our brains. So much of our emotional regulation, our emotional system is actually coming from our gut, which is why we feel it so much in our gut. And our gut is like a second brain communicating all the time with our brain. So question is, why do we feel this in our gut? And one of the reasons is that, of course, we all strive to be happy. I mean, that's what we all want, to be happy. But way back when our, bodies were developing and our autonomic nervous systems were developing, really our priority, and still our body's priority, is to be safe, to survive. That's our default state, is to figure out how to survive. And our brains are wired to survive. So if we are perceiving threat and we go into that fight or flight mode, the last thing we want to do is eat. Because, right, we're running away from a tiger so that we're not their lunch. So we're not going to stop and eat our lunch because we're too busy trying to survive. So our body sacrifices the GI system in this situation. And even if we don't live right now in a place where we're going to be eaten by a tiger, our bodies still perceive non-threatening threats in the same way. So if a kid has a test coming up, they might go into that fight or flight and sacrifice their GI system as if a tiger is chasing them. So my job is to look at what the pain is communicating. What is it that the stomach is telling us? Even sometimes literally talking to the stomach and asking it what it's telling us. But my job is to look at what is that communicating? What are the anxieties? What are the stressors that are causing the stomach to contract more and contract stronger because of the anxiety? So that's sort of where my launching point starts.
And that's a fantastic intro into understanding this mind-gut connection, because it really is talking to itself so much of the day. I think the central nervous system, if you could give us a little bit more on the central nervous system and what really happens, right? You touched upon the autonomic nervous system and the fight and flight piece of it, but could you give us an overview of that, and then we can talk a little bit more about what that really means?
Yeah, so we have the the brain, central nervous system in the brain, and it's communicating with what's called the enteral nervous system in the gut. And what happens is that they're communicating, and with kids who are the types of kids who end up getting abdominal pain or abdominal symptoms, not always pain because there's nausea and all sorts of other things we feel in our stomachs, but I'll just say abdominal symptoms. The kids who tend to get the abdominal symptoms, they tend towards anxious kids, or maybe they have OCD, or maybe they have undiagnosed learning disabilities, or OCD, or autism that has not been identified and treated, and so it's causing all these stressors. And so as the stressors are going on, the central pain is communicating with the body, and then these kids tend to be very perceptive and smart. I think that Dr. Ziering referred to the smart brain pain syndrome that Dr. Zeltzer coined. So the kids are really smart, and they start to pick up on these patterns, and they notice things in the body that other people aren't noticing. So, little things that have to do with digestion, they may be sensing. They might have hyperalgesia, sense it more than other people do. And then they start to really notice, oh my gosh, is that my stomach doing such and such? They start to get really hypervigilant, noticing everything that their stomach is doing. In the same time, their stomach is probably contracting stronger and more frequently, because that's what anxiety does. So then it becomes this feedback loop between what's happening in the stomach and the brain's perception of it. And I know we'll talk later about how that affects eating and, narrowing of foods and restricting diets and all of that, because kids start noticing patterns. Oh, if I eat this, my stomach hurts. If I eat this, my stomach hurts. And they start to narrow the foods we eat. And I know we'll get into that more. That your question wasn't about that, but it starts to be a feedback loop between noticing things happening in the stomach, having that interpretation in the brain that something's wrong, then becoming more hypervigilant about it, and then it just becomes a vicious cycle.
It really is. And what is the pain really communicating, right? It's communicating something that they have to be aware of. And how do you break that loop once that loop is started, right? Once the hypervigilant loop and the communication is heightened.
Right. So we break that loop several ways. So Dr. Ziering mentioned a few times using mindfulness and hypnotherapy and acupuncture. So I see it sort of as I always see each client situation as a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle. And you have all these pieces. And we start to just plug away at each piece. So what we're trying to do overall is lower the central nervous system, calm the system because it's firing really fast and really hard. And so we want to calm the system. So that can be through guided imagery, mindfulness, that can be through taking away the things that are really hard. So what is hard for this kid? What is happening that's really hard for them? Is it that they have an anxiety disorder and they need to learn cognitive skills and breathing skills? Are they having panic and they need to learn skills for the panic disorder? Is it that they have undiagnosed OCD and they're spending their whole day in their heads, and doing compulsions? Are they really, really bright, but they have a learning disability? And that is kind of causing this cognitive dissonance. Like, why am I having trouble when I know I'm smart? So there's so many factors that we have to look at. There's the family system and what's happening in the family that might be perpetuating or exacerbating the pain signaling. I always say that the parents of my kids tend to be really nice parents and really nice families who are accidentally doing things that keep the pain signaling going, almost because they're too nice, like they're feeding into it accidentally. So there are so many different factors, and we kind of try to plug away each one of them and work with the family, work with the school, work with the community. And I would say that the overarching goal is to take the child out of the sick role and sort of de-medicalize them and start to have them treated normally by everyone and function normally. And that's the main way that we pull them out of their pain.
So really what creative healing for youth in pain is all about, right? Changing the routine, getting us out of the lane that we're stuck in and getting us an off ramp onto another lane or another freeway, another highway in the body, in the whole system, right?
Right. And I think, CHYP CHYP addresses and welcomes kids with all sorts of pain disorders or fatigue or, can be even itching or, things that are kind of chronic that get in their way in their bodies. But this seminar I know is about abdominal issues in particular. And to me, the abdominal issues are really unique in a lot of ways because, if you have joint pain in your knee, let's say, or you have headaches, or you have, an ankle, CRPS in your ankle, or something like that, you don't technically, as horrible as it is, and I'm not diminishing how hard those pain disorders are, but from a practical point of view, you don't have to walk to live, but you do have to eat to live. And so abdominal issues have their own set of difficulties because if you don't walk, we can work with it and give you time, but if you don't eat, we don't have time. So it has sort of its own serious issues. If you're vomiting all the time, or if you're getting more and more underweight, we're sort of under a time crunch then, and it's a lot more dangerous to work with. So, that's one of the reasons why I think abdominal issues are different. Another reason is because if the child is eating less and less and less and becoming more and more underweight, from a psychological point of view, as the person becomes more malnourished, they actually become more irrational and more anxious. And so it's then harder to work with the child at that point, because that state that they get into makes them not think clearly, which is, different than if there are headaches or joint pain or that kind of thing. The other thing is, in all honesty, if a child or a teen or a preteen says, I have a problem with my leg or I have headaches, everybody, it is an invisible illness and it is really hard for all those kids to be recognized, but it's not embarrassing. And when kids have abdominal issues, that can be really embarrassing. Nobody wants to talk about their constipation or their diarrhea or their gas or their vomiting or their ruminations, because that just feels embarrassing. And so it's different. So if a kid goes to a social gathering, first of all, they always have to do with food. And so that causes problems for these kids. And then let's say they do eat something there and then they have to go to the bathroom and they're in there for a half an hour, and then that feels embarrassing. So the abdominal issues are different in that way.
And they're, maybe you can talk about why they're harder to diagnose, and how kids, I think what I want to ask is, how do parents help their kids when they are now avoiding food and cranky or uncooperative and don't want to change their routine or go to see a doctor? So if we could kind of talk about that as we move through some more big topics of pandemic and everything else, I think if we can touch upon that, it'd be great for everybody.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a hard question because I think that is so specific to the kid, the age, the personality. I would say that one of the things that I work with parents on is that kind of balance of trying to help your child but not trying to control them too much, because food is a tricky issue. And parents already have sometimes arguments about taking your medication or nagging and all these things. And so when you add food to it, you have to be careful because you don't want to create an eating disorder by making food sort of the issue of arguing. So a lot of times, I mean, again, this is a hard question because it really depends on the situation, but sometimes with younger kids, we'll have behavioral plans where they're getting actually rewarded for trying new foods, even if it's just a bite of the food, so that we can start to expand their repertoire. We have kids with parents helping kids eat, small meals throughout the day, trying different things. But I'm going to actually post a list of strategies for parents. I'll send that to Georgia and she can post it on the CHYP website. But basically the main thing is to help your child by providing the options, but not trying to control too much when and how much they eat. For example, I have clients who are teenagers, let's say, and they don't feel that hungry throughout the day, and they really try to eat, and they do eat a little bit, but then suddenly it's midnight and they're really hungry and they want to go in the kitchen and they make themselves something to eat, and then the parent comments, you really shouldn't eat that late at night. And I just go, no, don't do that. Let your kid eat whenever they're hungry, because just be glad that they're eating something. And I have had clients who have had parents say that and then they just don't eat. So we have to work on how much you're controlling your kids' diet. And of course, it depends on their age. I would say the one thing that Dr. Ziering touched on that I think needs maybe a psychological perspective more that could be helpful is this issue of limited diets, and parents hearing this, because a lot of parents will say, I read to try this diet or I read to try that diet, or the kids will say, I think every time I eat this food, my stomach hurts. And what I have a lot of clients tell me, and Dr. Ziering touched on this a lot actually, but from the medical perspective, he touched on it, was these diets that dietitians and nutritionists and alternative medicine doctors will often talk about, like the FODMAP diet is an example of that. But there are a lot of different ones, and the FODMAP one isn't even that limiting. But I have a client right now who went to an alternative medicine doctor, and I have absolutely nothing against alternative medicine doctors. This is just what this doctor said. She had a list, I swear, there were probably 50 foods she wasn't allowed to eat. And she was told that was only for a couple of months. But I know Dr. Ziering talked about one of the problems being that you may be losing out on nutrients when you do that. But from a psychological and family perspective, and this is looping back around to your question, Dana, about what parents should do. One of the problems with these diets is that it causes so much stress, number one, for the child, because it's really hard to follow the plan. When it's non-pandemic times, it's really hard to socialize with other kids when you can't eat anything that they're eating. It emphasizes them being different. So they're already feeling different. They're already feeling isolated because of their abdominal symptoms. And now they're completely different because they have to only eat these 3 foods every day. It focuses the attention on the problem. So it's very hard with these diets to not think about it all the time, because you're always trying to figure out what you can eat and when you can eat. And if there's supplements, they're being told, take this 2 hours before you eat, 1 hour after you eat, and they're trying to figure out when can I eat or what can I eat, and it gets very stressful. But the other thing is it causes arguments with the parents, and that's why I'm looping back around to what you asked. So the parents then understandably want the child to follow what the practitioner said. Like, well, if you don't follow what the practitioner said, how do we know if it's going to work? And so the parent and the child then get into conflict with each other, and I see it happen all the time. And then food becomes a topic of arguing. We don't want that to happen, because the stress is harmful to the kids, makes their abdominal pain worse, but also it leads sometimes to the kids then sneaking foods and eating the foods that then their parent and the practitioners don't want them to eat. That can cause an unhealthy relationship with foods, and it can cause an eating disorder down the line. It can also cause binge eating. It can also cause, weight gain, and that can be a problem for the child if they start to feel self-conscious about that. So, and then the other thing is that with these diets, sometimes if a child is told, okay, you only need to be on this diet, like the FODMAP, it can be really reasonable for a lot of kids to do it for a month and then add in foods. However, if you have a kid who has OCD or anxiety, but especially OCD, and you're told, eliminate all these foods, but then start adding them in after a month, sometimes they won't add them in because they get too scared about it. And they get into their routine of only eating those foods, and then they feel like they can't add them in. So there are a lot of factors emotionally that are detrimental when you try to get your kids to stick to these really limited diets.
Well, that leads me to a question I have about kids that associate stomach pain directly with food or eating, and therefore miss a meal.
Right. So this is one of the main reasons why kids end up losing weight and malnourished when they have abdominal symptoms. So what happens is, the child is really anxious, or something's going on that then is manifesting with abdominal symptoms, and they eat something, and their brains, because they're smart, go, oh, I don't feel well after I ate that. That food must cause stomach problems. The brain doesn't go, well, maybe my stomach would have hurt no matter what I ate, which is probably true. So it just associates that food. So, okay, now I can't eat that food. Next meal, same thing happens. Now I can't eat that food, until it finally narrows more and more and more. And then I end up with clients all the time who, I only eat beige foods, or I only eat red foods, or I only eat, rice, or I only eat pudding. So it kind of narrows down more and more and more, because their brain makes this association that doesn't probably really exist. I mean, there are definitely kids, obviously, with food allergies and food sensitivities. So I'm not saying that no one, and there are people who really know, okay, I can't eat this one kind of food or these two kinds of foods, and that's fine. But what happens is they start associating everything they eat with it. And then as they become more and more hypervigilant and they feel their digestive system happening, their digestive process happening, then every time they eat something, they feel pain and then they want to avoid eating, understandably.
And this is something that's coming up in the chat live right now that I can incorporate right into what we're talking about, because these kids are feeling real pain. The abdominal pain is real, regardless of the source. Perceived
Absolutely.
anxiety, perceived problems, real problems. So I think if we could talk about what's the best way to help a parent when their child is presenting with a physical pain, but you can see that's really coming potentially from an emotional thing. We want to validate that their pain is real, and yet not, like you said earlier, put them through endless testing. We want to be prudent and never miss something. We always want to seek proper Western help, but we also want to understand that there's this delicate balance between the autonomic nervous system and physical pain presenting. So if you could touch upon that, I think it would really help.
Yeah, they definitely are feeling real pain. So it's very damaging it's very damaging when many doctors, not Dr. Zeltzer or Dr. Ziering, but many doctors dismiss the pain and just say it's all in your head, or, that kind of thing. So we want to recognize that the pain or the nausea is real. So absolutely. Um, and and you're right. We want to make sure, of course, that we have the kids do a full and thorough workup to make sure that they don't have things that are going on like celiac or Crohn's or something that is the source of the pain. We don't want to overuse the workups, and Dr. Ziering touched on that a little bit, about not doing one workup after another. And I wanted to mention, by the way, really quickly, that another reason not to do those $1 million workups that are above and beyond what's needed is that I find that the kids start to feel really guilty about the time and money that their parents are spending, and then the parents start to feel resentful of the kids for that. So that's another reason that wasn't mentioned the other day for that. But in any case, what we need to do is again, come at it from a lot of different perspectives. So we always talk about the biopsychosocial perspective. So there's, the biological processes that are happening with the brain and the gut and emotions. And then there's the internal psychological processes that are happening that we have to explore in terms of what is the pain communicating and what is really happening psychologically that is underlying the issues. And then the social, what's happening with school, with church, with extended family, with immediate family. So one of the things that I try to tell the parents is, first of all, you want to really listen to your child and validate their feelings, and spend a lot of time doing that without trying to solve the problem for them, so that they really have an opportunity to express what they're feeling. I know that it really causes anxiety for parents when your child is in pain. I understand. I'm a parent, and I get that. But if you can sort of take a breath and slow down and just listen to your child, and give them that space to be able to open up, because a lot of times kids will tell me they want to talk to their parents, but then they don't feel that their feelings are really validated, and so they stop talking to their parent. Another thing is that I hear from kids all the time is my parent always asks me questions at the wrong time. So if they've just finished school, they don't want to answer questions because they're burnt out. However, if they're lying in bed and it's dark, and you go into their room and you sit on their bed at night in the dark, where they're a lot more vulnerable and they often feel more open, that's a really good time to just let them talk. So, part of it is kind of choosing the right time with your child, and also not making it so obvious, not like sitting down to talk, but just if you're driving in the car or if you're cooking together, just kind of casually, not acting like you care too much because that will kind of throw them off, but just, you care enough that it's casual, they can tell you or not tell you, so that you're not too invested in it, but you're open to it. And in terms of, for example, I have a client who had been through a sort of traumatic situation and then had a trigger to that situation a little while later, had worse stomach pain afterwards, and the parent didn't connect that, and so was calling the doctor, the kid's having worse stomach pain and all of this, and then I got on the phone with the kid, realized there had been that trigger. So some of it is too talking to your child and trying to see if there's something going on, or thinking to yourself like what could have happened that's causing that. I had another client who was telling me that her stomach was hurting really badly, but she had gotten a new puppy. She was really excited and she didn't know why her stomach was hurting with the new puppy, and she was saying that this time the stomach pain wasn't from anxiety because she wasn't feeling anxious. Well, 10 minutes earlier, I remember her talking to me about how she gets really scared when the puppy goes running around like crazy and growling and biting. And I said, it sounds like the puppy is a little stressful sometime. And then she started crying. So because she's wanted this puppy forever, and it's hard for her to think that it's scary to her sometimes. So there are usually things going on that the parent can, if they really think about it from a psychological perspective instead of a medical perspective, they can start noticing.
Which is, it's all about the two sides of the coin, right? It's all about the physical body and the emotional body. I think that's a perfect segue into what we're all dealing with, the stress today of the pandemic and how it affects us, whether we think we are managing it well or not. It's had huge implications on all of our day-to-day living. And I'd love to have your perspective on being at home all the time for kids, being in their room, what the coping mechanisms are, and then lead specifically into how food plays into both sides of that: overeating, undereating, irregular, as you say, dysregulated eating.
Absolutely. So remember when we started out, we talked about our bodies being wired for survival, right? So when we're in survival mode, the main thing we need besides fight, flight, or freeze, the main thing we need is to not be alone. We need to be, originally with our tribe. We need to be in our social group in order to survive. And obviously right now, during the pandemic, the biggest issue is isolation. So we have the double whammy. We're in a moment of chronic danger, so to speak, and we're isolated. So there's that double whammy that we're all facing. And during the pandemic, suicides have gone up 25% in kids. And I just read that 43% of Gen Zs report increased stress during the year. And the things that they say are causing them the most stress are uncertainty about their future, of course, but change in routine, which you just alluded to, and isolation. So anyone who had symptoms before the pandemic, like anxiety, it's now usually ratcheted up. And now maybe, I have some clients who say, I used to feel anxious, but I had strategies and I would use distraction and I would, go exercise or whatever and I'd be fine. But now I'm having panic attacks. So it's like things are kind of ratcheted up from where they used to be, or some people who didn't experience anxiety before suddenly experiencing it for the first time. So, when we think about that analogy of running from the tiger, that is an acute thing. So most of the time we have something that might happen where, let's say it's like a natural disaster. Let's say it's a really big danger, like a natural disaster or something like that, or being a victim of violence. as horrible as that is, it happens. You go into that fight or flight mode, and then you start to, go back to your homeostasis, and you hopefully process it and go through your process and recover. But right now, we're just in that chronic state, and that really wreaks havoc on the body. And kids are perceiving these images of threat all the time. Like, you walk out of the house and you see people in masks. That's kind of scary. I mean, we're used to it now, sort of, but it's kind of a scary image. And the streets being empty at first, and the media, it's all talking about it nonstop, and all the adults around them are talking about it nonstop. And then when you have kids home all day long, they're around their stressed out parents, and they're around their stressed out siblings. So they're soaking in everybody else's stress also. And along with those kids with the smart brain pain syndrome is also kids who are so super sensitive to all the emotion around them. So they're soaking all of that in this whole time. I also think one of the differences with this pandemic compared to other kind of more acute traumas that happen is that those things, like a natural disaster, are really easy to pinpoint. Like, it was the hurricane that caused the problem. With the pandemic, it's sort of like this vague trauma. Like, it's kind of hard to pinpoint. I mean, obviously, if you have a family or loved one who passed away from it, that's clear. But in general, there's kind of this like just vague feeling of uncertainty that I think is really hard for everyone. For kids who are already focused on their body and hypervigilant about their body, now there's even more focus on the body because everyone's talking about COVID, which has to do with your body and illness in your body. So all of a sudden, these kids who are already super focused on their bodies, especially because, there's not that abdominal symptoms are a big part of COVID, but it's definitely talked about that there are some GI symptoms. So then, I have a lot of clients going, like, is that COVID? Is that COVID? When they have their GI symptoms. So there's that increase in hypervigilance. But what you were talking about, Dana, I think is the lack of routine in eating. So when our kids are home all day now, they don't have the structure of eating that they normally have. So think about when your kids go to school, they eat breakfast before they go to school, and then they eat, or a snack at school. Then they eat lunch at school. They come home and have a snack, and then they have dinner. It's like, it's very regimented. And our hunger cues are usually kind of associated with those times. But if you're home all day and the kitchen is right there, I have some clients who just forget to eat all day because they don't have that routine. And I have other clients who are eating all day long because the kitchen's there. So that both of those cause problems. And interestingly, I have one client who, she's in 9th grade. Her parents make her eat breakfast, so she eats breakfast. And then they have family dinner, so she eats dinner. And she had not been eating anything all day long. And at first she just said food didn't appeal to her, and she felt kind of icky when she thought about eating. So we talked about that. Well, it turned out the reason why she felt icky when she thought about eating was because she'd have to go downstairs, because her bedroom's upstairs. She'd have to go downstairs to eat during the day, and then she'd see her family. And that stressed her out. So she was avoiding eating. And so when we worked through that and figured out some ways to make it easier for her, she finally admitted that it did feel really good to eat, and she did feel better once she ate, and she actually started getting better grades in school once she started eating during the day. So you have to kind of look at what the factors are that are the problem. Also, some kids are eating in their rooms, they're eating in bed, they're doing things that they didn't do before, and that can sometimes sort of mess up routines. So I think it's affected food a lot. In general, I also think that one of the things that is affecting the kids psychologically, and then as we've talked about, the emotional effects of stomach, is that a lot of times kids are going out to eat with friends, they're having lunch with friends at school, on the weekends they're getting dinner with friends, things like that, that they haven't been able to do during the pandemic. And all of those um, ways that kids increase their autonomy, especially preteens and teens, by getting more independent, choosing their foods, going out to eat with friends, getting out of the house, that kind of angling towards peers and away from parents at that age, it's so important. It's such an important, probably the most important part about preteens and teens, and right now that's been taken away from them. So there's this feeling of being trapped. And if you think about it, if you're completely trapped and you're put in a box, let's say, which is literally like we're trapped in a box all day on Zoom, basically, you don't feel like eating. You feel, just think about being literally trapped in a box. That makes me feel queasy. And I think these kids are feeling completely trapped. They're trapped in the computer, they're trapped in their rooms, they're trapped in their homes, they're trapped, with their families instead of their friends. And even though they're FaceTiming with their friends, it's not the same at all as being with their friends in person. It's not even close to being the same. I did want to say one other quick thing about the Zoom with teens, is that as I sit here on Zoom seeing myself, I'm an adult, and it's already annoying to watch myself all day. But if I'm a preteen or a teenager and I'm seeing myself all day long, that is horrifying for many kids, because especially the preteens, they already feel and think that they're literally under a spotlight all day long. They think that everybody's analyzing everything about them and that they're being looked at in under a magnifying glass, and then they actually are. And it can make them feel so self-conscious. So that is another, I think, issue with the pandemic in terms of kids and teens.
I think you brought up something really important that as parents we forget. It's like when you get a dog, right, or a baby, and you forget they're human. They have emotions. They have human emotions, right? And our children have so many. But more importantly, they're coping all day. And we take it for granted that their routine of going to school, that they've handled it. But every day is new, and especially in the Zoom world. And what we thought, when you were talking about, they come out of their room and they see their family. And to families, that could sound harsh, but this is a very serious reality that you brought up, that they've had to pull it together to get up, to be in their room, away from people, looking at themselves, and coping all day with this new world order. For some, I think there's a level in there that takes away some social anxiety of being in person, but it's still a coping. And then you have to come out, and as parents, we forget, we're so excited to see them that they've emerged from their rooms, that there are questions, and we've held our needs about when do they want to do this and when can they see that. And I think you brought up something so profound in that we need to remember as parents to give them a moment when they come out of their room and let them cope and adjust.
Right.
And that leads me into how kids are coping and adjusting, right? We're obviously talking about food, but exercise. Some of these kids are over-exercising, and to a certain degree it's healthy. But as parents are watching their bodies adjust, maybe you could guide us through please avoid saying some of these things. And these are things that you could say when you're trying to help adjust this new coping mechanism of your kids.
Right. So, in the olden days of pre-pandemic, when I talked to parents, I would always say, when you pick up your kid from school, don't talk about school. Put on the music in the car and let them adjust the radio to what they want, and just hang out for a while. And so it's kind of the same thing. If they're coming out of their room after the day of Zoom, think about before the pandemic, how a lot of the discussion was about how kids get irritable after they've been on screens for a long time. And one of the reasons that they shouldn't be on screens for a long time is because it increases irritability. So you gotta remember that your kid is probably going to be irritable when they're done with their Zoom day. So one practical thing, by the way, that I would suggest if they can is moving to different rooms sometimes for different classes throughout the day. So I have one client who goes to a different room for every class. So she does one in her bedroom, one in her sister's room, one at the dining room table, one in the kitchen, just to kind of vary their environment. But in any case, to be aware that your kid has been in the spotlight, trapped in their box all day, and that they just need some space. So yes, holding off the questions for a while and taking care of your own mental health, I think, is really important for the parents, so that we're all going through this. So you're going through it as a parent, your child is going through it as a child. No one has any answers. No one has been through a pandemic before. None of us have. So being kind to yourself that we don't have all the answers, and doing what you need to do to take care of yourself, whether it's getting your own exercise, or talking to a therapist, or doing some self-care throughout the day, can go a long way for your own child, because then they're not having to soak in your stress. But I think that if parents can think of everybody together as sort of a team, of course you are the kind of like the benevolent dictator. You are the final say. But that kind of authoritative parenting, where it's a team and you're not so permissive that the child can do anything they want, because that's scary, but you're not dictating in such a strict way everything, but you're talking about it as a team. So for example, you talked about overexercise, which can happen, but for most of our kids, I notice that they're getting less exercise during the pandemic, and I'm trying to get them to exercise. So trying to think of things in a team way as much as possible. So instead of telling your kid, you really need to exercise because that'll help with your anxiety, and because, Dr. Levy says that, it's good for your stomach and your anxiety, to instead say, like, let's all go for a bike ride together, or, let's all play a family game of volleyball in the backyard, or whatever, that you make it fun, and you do fun things together, instead of making it an assignment for them, or you do some kind of, community service that you can do in a safe way together, or you safely have, another family over to the backyard, social distancing, all that stuff, so that you're all doing things that are good for everyone together. So that the kid doesn't feel like you're just telling them what to do because that's supposed to be helpful to them. I even have a bunch of families who, instead of trying to get their kid to do their guided imagery, that they do goofy things like, before dinner, everybody flops down on the floor and listens to an app together for 10 minutes, that taking them through a guided imagery. Or they, all get in their parents' bed and have a pillow fight before bedtime, or just whatever it is that can just help everybody feel like they're doing it together, instead of telling the teenager, this is what you have to do to make yourself feel better.
Or not to. Or tell what not to do. What,
and in terms of food, let me just say one thing, sorry. In terms of food, it's like, these kids have no control right now. I mean, they feel so out of control. So if we control their food too much, then that can be difficult. So what I would say about the food part is, you have control over the groceries in your home. So you can have control over what is in the kitchen, and you can have control over, cooking healthy meals, but don't try to control how much of the meal your kid eats, or when they eat, if they're hungry later, or if they're hungry earlier. Let them eat when they feel like their stomach can handle it, and let them eat what they, let them learn to understand their hunger cues, so that you're not trying to control that so much. I have a client who is severely underweight because of the abdominal pain, and we're working on it. And she does not have an eating disorder, but she is getting to a dangerous point of being underweight. And she eats whenever she can, and we've worked on all these strategies for eating. But 2 days in a row, she really felt like In-N-Out, and which is great because that's good calories for her. Lots of calories. She really needs them. And her mom commented on, you really shouldn't eat In-N-Out that often. And I said to her mom, do not comment on what she eats. This is a kid who's going to end up in the hospital really soon because she's underweight. So let's be really happy that she had the In-N-Out and not comment on it. And sometimes her parents will comment if she eats certain times of the day. I'm like, no, that's when she feels like she can eat. She needs to eat then, because she's going to be hospitalized if she doesn't. So we don't want to, and by the way, that kid stopped eating at the times that her parents said not to eat, which is dangerous. And she started hiding from her parents what she was eating. So she would go out and get a burrito or something, and she didn't think her parents would approve of that. She just would tell them that she had a salad. So that is not a good recipe for healthy eating. So we don't want to control what and when our kids eat, as long as it's, relatively reasonable.
And there's so many good questions coming up, and I know we're closing, and we have 7 minutes until 11 o'clock hour. And I know you were gracious enough to say you could go past and answer more questions. So for those of you that want to stay on, and I appreciate everybody's time, so I don't want to take advantage of it. So I'm going to try to cover some of the important questions as fast as possible. One of the questions that came up right now, which is perfect what you just said, is what about the reverse? If the kids have gained weight and are eating too much right now, because that is their coping, and they are home.
And they are what?
Sorry?
What was the last thing you said? They're coping and they're what?
And they're eating too much. It's the opposite of what you were just experiencing with your client.
Right. I mean, so that's what I was sort of saying about like what you like you do have control of what's in your kitchen. So, you want to try to have healthy snacks available and healthy dinners and all of that stuff. And when you're preparing meals, prepare healthy meals for your kids. And if they're eating a lot and throughout the day, you can make rules, but don't say this is why you're making the rule, like that you can't eat in your bedroom, things like that. Don't say it's because you're eating too much, but you prefer to have the food only eaten in the kitchen or things like that, so that they're not snacking all day long. But I think the other thing is, the more you comment on it, the more they're going to have to hide it, and then that will exacerbate the problem. So you want to maybe look at what is causing it and think about, obviously the pandemic is a stressor. So what are the other stressors? What are ways that you guys can help? What are the ways that the parents can help the child reduce their stressors? Because eating is, some people eat less when they're stressed, and some people eat more in order to soothe themselves. And sometimes I talk to parents about, think of it as they're eating to nurture themselves. So what are other ways that you can help nurture them? So do they need more of your attention? Do they need more hugs? Like literally, do they need more time spent together, playing a game or reading, or depending on the age, what kind of time? Do you need to go on the floor and play with your kid more? Does the kid need to kind of get some of their stressors out through exercise? So you need to go run around with them and go play tag with them, or go on a bike ride. So we need to kind of look at what are the ways that they need nurturing, and what are the ways that you can help them dispel, kind of disperse some of this anxious energy. So it's hard because it depends on the kid, and it depends on what they're needing in terms of the nurturing. I think we need to look at ourselves too and say, okay, this is a really, really busy, stressful time for the parents also. And I've noticed that even though the kids are with their parents more, a lot of kids are saying that their parents are busier than ever and just not available. Um, and maybe before there was this sense like my parents were at work and then they were working at work and then they were home and they were giving me attention when they were home, but now it's all bleeding together. And so parents forget to delineate those times, between work and non-work times with their kids. And you just may need to put aside um, more time to really focus on your child. And that doesn't mean a block of time. That can mean, it doesn't have to mean, let's say, an hour block of time. That could be like, 32-minute blocks of time where you're checking in, where you go into your kid's room like, hey, how's it going? Is there anything I can, do for you? Or you just say like, how's your day going? Or you, just go in and give them a hug, or you ask them if they want to help you cook or whatever. But you have these little pockets where you're connecting, where you're actually making eye contact, which I know sounds ridiculous, but you would be surprised how many parents are not actually making eye contact with their kids because they're looking at a computer while they're sort of talking to them, or they're looking at their phone. And just even nurturing through that eye contact, the physical contact, can go a really long way.
And I think all these little things are so important. I think where a lot of the parents are struggling right now is how do you help your children who are really fighting you with the help, right? They are presenting with some type of pain. For the argument, let's just say it's stomach, and they're associating it with food, but they don't want to disengage the relationship between food causing stomach pain. How do we help those kids help themselves, really?
So you're talking about kids who deny that there's a psychological component and just want to see it as a physiological issue. Is that what you're saying?
No, but that's a really good way to say it, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think that's a hard one for parents to do on their own. That's where the therapist comes in, I think, because the parents are too close to the kids. I mean, that's one of the reasons that kids will talk to me about things that they don't talk to their parents about. It's not that I'm any, better of a person to talk to. It's just I'm not their parent. So um, it's really hard to hear that kind of thing from your parent. I think that one of the things is for the parents to look at how their own behavior and and communication with their child is accidentally communicating that same thing that you're talking about, because I feel like that communication often comes from the parents. So when parents say things like, well, do you think it was the blank that you ate that's causing your stomach to hurt? That's giving a subtle message that it's from the food. Or when the parent says, oh, I wonder if it's because of that medication you just took, or I'm going to call the doctor and find out if, we should do X, Y, and Z. All totally natural things and understandable, but those all send the message that it's a non-psychological reason that the stomach is hurting. So if the parent starts getting in the habit of either using distraction, saying like, oh, I'm so sorry that your stomach hurts, let me know if there's something I can do, and then just moving on to something else and using distraction so that they're not feeding into it too much, or saying to the kid, over and over again, hey, is there anything that's bothering you? Did anything happen today that was stressful? Eventually the kids will often learn that there is a connection. The other thing that parents tend to do is, again, like I said, they're nice parents. They're trying to be helpful. So they'll start, do you want a heating pad? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want, and of course, because you want to help your child, but that also sends the message that that's what I mean. And of course, those things can help, but it subtly sends a message too that that away from the psychological reasons.
And what if your child doesn't want to address it with outside help? What would your recommendation be for those families? Obviously, families are coming onto this lecture and learning and really curious, and it awakens us to remember maybe to just adjust whatever we're doing, as good intention as it is, it may not be the right way for that child in that moment. And so we all could benefit from learning a new way and helping, especially if our kids have gotten stuck in what we call a sticky neural loop, which in this case is affecting most of the people on here, their children's gut. But what if we're at a place where that child is reluctant to seek outside help, is really putting up a barrier between here they are complaining, it's painful to watch them in pain, they're physically in pain, whether it's rooted initially in something emotional or not, and they just aren't going to go see somebody. They won't take a blood test for fear of a needle. They won't take a pill for fear of pills. They don't want to be seen as weak. What can we do to help?
So I think that in that situation, I mean, first of all, you want to work together as a team with your child as much as possible and say, like, I really am sad that you are in a lot of pain, and I don't want you to have to live like that. So let's talk together about what can be helpful to you. What is it that we can do that can be helpful? If there is a medication that would help you and you can't swallow pills, do you want to work with someone? You don't have to say like therapy and emotional stuff, but do you want to work with someone just to help you be able to do that? Like, because I work with kids all the time with that kind of thing, or with needle phobias, just to desensitize. So do you want to work with someone not in therapy, but just to help with this particular specific thing? Or, let's talk about what are the things that we've noticed seem to distract you from your pain. I know your pain is always there. I know you're always uncomfortable, but what are the things that make it at least go into the background instead of the, forefront of your consciousness? So, the kid might say, well, when I'm playing video games, or when I'm talking to friends, or when I'm, outside playing basketball, it's there, but I don't notice it as much. Okay, that's great. Let's increase the times when you do those kinds of activities. Let's try to find a time, every day when you can socialize with a friend safely. So you work with them on finding the things that make it at least tolerable. One of the things that I think is the most helpful with this kind of thing that parents can do on their own is straddle that balance between not indulging the pain too much, because then you reinforce it, but also acknowledging it. So to be able to say, let's say your kid is talking to a friend and you can see that they're laughing and they're having a good time, and one of the mistakes that parents make all the time is, oh, I'm glad you're feeling better. I hear that you were laughing with your friend. I'm glad you're feeling better. And then the kid is like, oh my God, my mom thinks that I don't have a stomach ache, even though I do. And then now I have to sort of ratchet it up, and the brain goes, I have to cause more pain and express it more so that my parent gets it. So one of the things that seems to help the most is for parents to always acknowledge that the pain is there, but then also notice what seems to help. So for example, let's say you hear your kid laughing and joking with their friends, and they haven't talked to friends in days because their stomach has been so bad. So then you would say something like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you were, able to finally get together with your friends, even though your stomach's still not good. So you're acknowledging that they still have the stomach ache, but you're reinforcing that there are things that, help them push through it. Let's say they haven't been able to do homework in a couple days because they're in too much pain, and they do it. If you say, oh, I'm so glad you're feeling better, that you can do your homework, again, they will think, oh, my parent doesn't understand that I'm not well, and then they won't do homework for the next 2 days, just so they can show the parent that they're still not well. But if you say, I am so proud of you that you pushed through and did the homework even though you're not 100%, then they feel validated and reinforced for what they were able to do. So you wanna help them move forward in functioning. We haven't really addressed this, but I think Dr. Ziering mentioned this. I mean, one of the main things, besides getting your kid out of the sick role, and one of the ways to get your kid out of the sick role is you want to increase their normal functioning, because we know that the normal functioning precedes the pain decrease. So one way to get your kid to function more normally is to acknowledge that they're not doing well and to praise them for pushing through anyway.
And I think that all of these things that we can say to our kids from a different perspective will help us move our children further out of the pain cycle, whatever that cycle is that's triggered this new pain cycle. I know we've touched upon it a bunch of different ways, but I'd really like to go back to this, especially as we get near the end here. We've run over, but everybody's still on, so I want to make sure I cover some of these things again. With the children that associate eating with pain. So just the more normal kids, not with any other, they're not so skinny or anything. They've never dysregulated their eating. They associate food with pain, and they're fearful. And then they potentially skip a meal and then overeat at night. And we talked about this with Dr. Ziering, who brought up some really interesting and important things, which is it has other health implications when you skip 2 meals and only eat 1, and then go through that. But I'd like to talk about it from the psychological side of what that does when you fear the meal, so you miss it or avoid it or have some altered relationship with it, and then you do eat, and then the pain comes back.
Right, sure. So, there are a lot of ways that we and strategies that we use to try to get kids to break that cycle. So one of the things that I suggest to my clients is eat tiny amounts very frequently. So that might be a bite or 2, every hour, just to start to get the stomach used to it. Because I think what happens is the stomach gets used to not eating, and then it gets harder and harder to eat. So it gets harder physically because the stomach, gets more sensitive and isn't used to it, and it gets harder emotionally because no one wants to put themselves in pain. So the frequent small meals can be really helpful. And I ask parents to just be very flexible with the types of food that their kids eat. So, work with your kid, ask them what feels better. So if, like, for some kids, liquids feel better than solids. And so then I have, let your child tell you, do thin liquids feel better or do thicker liquids feel better? Like, go with what feels easier at first and the most soothing. Don't worry about, well, then they're not eating solid food, or they're, just start, and we're going to slowly build up. So let's say your kid feels better with thin liquids, and so you have them have some Ensure or some Boost or something to get the nutrients and the calories in. And then you start to make them smoothies, and then you start to make them slowly thicker and thicker and thicker until they get to a point where they can have something that is that thickness. And then you start to do what I call like a lateral move, where you're introducing foods that are similar but different. So let's say they're eating thick smoothies and that's all they're eating all day long. That's the only thing they can eat. That's fine. Have them eat the thick smoothies and then start adding in other thick foods like yogurt, or pudding, or thick soups like purees. So you start to kind of move into more variety, but within that same kind of level. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because you have to understand that there's so much fear involved because nobody wants abdominal pain. And so the fear is really, really intense. So you want to go with what feels less fearful. And so, and then extend and expand into the same kind of category. And then you talk to the kid about, hey, you're having these purees. What if we just have a couple little smooth chunks in it? What do you think about that? And you start to just build up then from there. And so I think, you want to do it as a team. You want to do it together with your kid as a team. Um, there's another little trick that I use with nausea in particular, which is a lot of times both emotionally and physiologically. When I say emotionally and physiologically, what I mean is if you're feeling nauseous because you're emotionally upset, or there's just other reasons that you're feeling nauseated, a lot of the problem with eating is the swallowing part. So if you think about it, if you're nauseated, it's like chewing doesn't really matter, but you just can't imagine swallowing the foods. So what I do is I have the parents give the kids foods that don't need to be swallowed, so to speak. So things that just melt in the mouth. And I tell the kids, don't swallow. And tell the parents, tell your kid, don't swallow this. Just chew it. Just chew it, and that's all you have to do. And eventually it just trickles down. So, things like Cheerios or Rice Krispies or Hippies, or there's an Israeli snack called Bamba that's like a peanut kind of puff that just melts in the mouth, or even those crackers that are given to babies that they teeth on, those just kind of melt. So you can start even, with something like that, and just say like, just chew and don't swallow. So there's a lot of different, and like I said, I'll post these techniques. Don't worry about what time your kid is eating. Don't worry about how much they're eating, but just help them whatever ways that feel most comfortable. I do suggest to kids that they do relaxation before they eat if they're willing to do it. So that might be like a 5-minute guided imagery on an app, just to kind of calm their system down before they eat. If the kid doesn't want to do that, you can do it as a family. I mean, you could sit at the dinner table and do a mindfulness exercise all together before you take your first bite. And then
it's been amazing, Dr. Levy, and it's 11:15. I noticed, and everybody's still here. A lot of people. But I think that in the interest of time, we'll wrap it up. We can always have you back if you'll be so kind as to give us an hour of your valuable time. I think all the tools you gave us, and ending with that tool is an amazing thing, because so many of these kids have nausea. So it seems like the perfect one to close today. And thank you for not only your time and everybody else's time who joined us today, but for providing us with the information today and a list that you suggested you'll be posting that we'll have on the CHYP website. I'll kick it back to Georgia, but again, I want to thank everybody, especially Dr. Levy, for her incredible expertise in this area and the many, many years you've had helping families. I hope this helps somebody today. And if you have more questions, I recommend that you submit them to CHYP, or somehow you can email us. We can post the email on the chat, and you can submit them, and we can try to curate another lecture around those questions. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And Georgia, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levy and Dana, for that very informative presentation. Thank you, everybody, for staying on a little late. We'll be sending the video to all of you, and for those who had to hop off at 11, which we completely understand. This was the second of the 3 events in our abdominal pain, anxiety, and how to help your teen during COVID-19 series. The next one will be this upcoming Tuesday with CHYP's founder and president, Dr. Lonnie Zeltzer, who will go into a deeper explanation of the mind-body connection and how you can help your child understand their internal signals. And as always, please feel free to contact us with any questions. I put our admin email in the chat, admin@mychip.org. You can follow us on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, a YouTube channel. You can also visit our website, mychip.org. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Levy and Dana, for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.